This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Care Notes from Cherished Companions. Now, I know a lot of the times when you tune in to watch this podcast, you see Doug sitting where Lisa is sitting right now. And that is because Doug has asked Lisa to share a conversation with us about caregivers. And any of you who have had to have caregivers for either an elderly parent or a spouse or even for yourself, you know that it's not just hiring somebody off the street. It has to be somebody who knows what they're doing, is compassionate about the work, and is going to show up. And that's a real important part of it. So, Lisa, welcome to New Cleveland Radio.
Thank
And
you.
tell us a little bit about, how do you put out the word that you need caregivers? Because COVID has really, stretched everybody to their limits.
Yeah, that's for sure. So we use a few different avenues. I think like most companies at this point, a lot of things are done online. And so we have our website, which has our career link, which will lead people, directly to our application, which is probably, the best way. But as far as advertising for it, we use Indeed, you know, just job boards, I should say.
Sure.
We use all the popular job boards, but in addition to that, we also put ads in the local newspapers, which I'm not sure a lot of people do anymore, but we still do that. We find that's a great way to really get into the community and attract the type of people, the caregivers that we're looking for.
Sure.
And then we also use some of the local churches have job boards or postings, and we use that, or community centers. We have a good connection with specific communities of people that we try to dig into. And then our number one place to get caregivers is referrals. And so, our name, I think, speaks for itself, where the people that work for us, it really is, a great place to work. And so they tend to bring people in, and that's where we get the majority of our hires.
Well, and COVID really um, put out the call that we need more caregivers. Um, Individuals who may have thought that they were going to maybe move to assisted living or independent living, um, COVID, changed their mind, and many of them who were living in those facilities chose, "Hey, I want to go back home." Um, because at least back home, I might be able to see my children and grandchildren. Um, and so now, instead of maybe having X amount that you had prior to COVID, you probably need at least double that. And you really can't tell who a person is just because they answer an ad and say, "Hey, I want to be a caregiver." So, how do you identify what you're looking for in a caregiver?
Well, um, so it's a good question. We kind of look for a few criteria, obviously. Ideally, we look for somebody that has some sort of experience with this, just so that we know that they've kind of been in the field, for a minute or whatnot. But that's not necessarily our number one. Like, that doesn't knock somebody out if they don't have experience, because what we're truly looking for is the heart of a caregiver. And so, we have to dig down into that. And so when we do the interview process, for one, our interview process is fairly rigorous. And we do that for a reason, because we want to make sure that the people that we have working for us, although, like you said, the need is great, we don't want to hire just bodies. We want to hire people who are the right people, that fit our culture, that fit our team, so that we know that when we're sending them out to a client, any client, they're going to have somebody that's going to give them the best possible care. And so they go through a phone interview first, application process, obviously. Then they go through a phone interview first, and then a face-to-face interview with Doug, who you mentioned. And we ask behavioral type questions. So we're digging into what experiences have you had. And so, if I ask somebody, tell us about a time that, you had to deal with a difficult client and how you handled it, maybe how you turned things around, or a difficult person. So even somebody that hasn't had experience necessarily caregiving, we've all had experience with somebody in our life
Right.
who's difficult, who needs that. And we found that the majority of people that come work for us have had some sort of caregiving experience, whether it be caring for a family member, babysitting. We're all part of a family, so it's hard to get through life and reach a certain age without having cared for somebody in one way or another. So I think in one way or another, we're all caregivers at heart. It's just, how does that manifest itself?
It's interesting because before I got into podcasting, I worked at a college, and at that college, almost every student who walked into my office wanted to be a nurse. At least that's what they told me they wanted. I want to be a nurse. And my first question would be, that's great. Uh, but why? Oh, because I love helping people. And I would turn it around and say, there's many ways of helping people without being a nurse, without being anything in the medical field. Okay. Um, but where is it in your heart? What is it you want to do as that nurse or that caregiver? Um, are you doing it because, oh, if I become a caregiver, I can go to somebody's house and I can sit there for 8 hours? And the answer is no, you're not going to be sitting there for 8 hours. You have a job to do, and that job may be just entertaining that individual, or it could be more in depth by actually providing, physical care that they may need short of nursing. Um, and so, for those listening, I want you to understand that what Lisa's talking about is that, yeah, they're going to dig deep. It's more than just because, you know, uh, I want to do it, but how would you do it? And what does your day look like being a caregiver? And especially during these times of COVID. Uh, so, I know part of the process, and we've talked about this with Doug as well, is that it is vigorous. There are numerous interviews. Um, Obviously, people are going to have a background check because you're not going to send them into somebody's home, not knowing, if they really are good there. And you also look for that good fit. So the first day that maybe I'm hired and I walk in and we think I'm a good fit, um, if I contact you and tell you what the issues are where I don't think I'm a good fit, either you and Doug and your staff, you're going to work with me to make it work, or you're going to look for somebody else, because honesty is really important when it comes to connecting your client and the caregiver, correct?
Absolutely. And so, whenever we hire somebody new, obviously they've gone through the interview process. We know them a little bit, but you can't get a huge feel for somebody until you've actually worked with them for a while and whatnot. So to the best of our ability, we match people up on certain criteria. I would say 4 criteria. Location, people are only going to drive so far. Skill level, because obviously there's a difference between a caregiver that we hire that was, for instance, I was a caregiver. I had no experience. I was kind of that. I had the heart for caregiving. I had been a nanny for years. I knew I wanted to do this, but I had not really had any hands-on experience. So I'm going to start off on a different client than somebody that's an STNA and has been doing this for 15 years.
Sure.
And then there's availability, which is an obvious one. But the fourth is that personality. And that's that one that's kind of that question mark for a little while. And so anytime we send a new caregiver into a client, there is that, is this going to work? And once we get to know our caregivers, we're really good at matching up. And so we always tell new hires, pick up those fill shifts for one. For two, give it a minute, because my very first nanny job, I went in and it was just like horrible. And I remember telling myself, give it 2 weeks, because it's a relationship. Caregiving is a
Right.
relationship. And so it's the same way. You're going into a home of somebody who, our goal is to help people remain independent. And so that independence looks different for every single person. And so for some of the people, their independence looks like, I don't want a caregiver.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to like anybody, but then as they have a caregiver, they realize they're actually more independent, because now they have somebody that can drive them someplace, or now they have somebody that can it's not their daughter who's questioning everything they do that's going to help them do their laundry or help them clean out their closet or whatever thing. But suddenly they can do this stuff. It's kind of like an extra pair of hands and feet that they didn't have before, and they suddenly love it. But the first couple of days might have been rocky. And so, one, we tell everybody, try to give it a chance, like try to build that relationship first before you decide this just isn't a right fit. But two, if it isn't a right fit, because sometimes it's just not a right fit, we have so many options. There's so many different options that we can try. But I've also found, like my very first job, I was a caregiver here before I came into the office, and my very first client was not the hours I wanted. But once I went in there, I did it as a fill, and I fell in love with her, and I was like, oh, I'll change my schedule to match this client. And so, like everything in life, I think we have to hold it loosely. We have to be willing to be flexible. And especially like you said, during COVID, during these times, the need is so great. You mentioned, people are wanting to come home, people are wanting to stay home for safety, for other reasons. Most people's dream is to be in their home until they pass. And so, we have such an amazing opportunity. When I say we, I mean the society, our neighborhood, to be something for someone to fulfill that dream. And, I've had ads that say, dream fulfillers, dream makers, because that truly is what we're doing. This isn't just a job. And I know that sounds cliche, but I mean it, that, you're going into a place every day where you can go home at night and you are making a difference in somebody's life. And so it's huge.
Well, and I'm all for at-home caregiving. As I've discussed numerous times with Doug, the last 2.5 months of my mother's life, we had in-home care for her. Even though I was living in the house with her, I knew there were certain things that for her dignity, it was not for me to do. And, she really had no concept of how ill she was. And so I really wanted to be there just to make sure that her caregivers were the proper fit. And a good portion of them were. And you could tell that, they were vying for more hours to be with her because they enjoy being with her. And yet there were other caregivers who came in and they'd look at me and they'd say, well, since you're here, I'm going to go take my dinner break. Well, you just walked in the door, like, I don't think it's your dinner break. And so I would, develop relationships with them because I needed them to be comfortable with me there as well as taking care of my mother. And I'm sure that that happens to some degree with your clients because family, can drop in at any time, and family may have one idea how you should be taking care of their loved one, and their loved one may have another way that they want you to be with them. And so there's a fine balance. So how do you handle that when the family maybe walks in and says, wait a second, I don't think Susie Q's taking care of mom right. And mom is saying, oh no, I'm happy.
It's that's always a fine balance and not always an easy thing. Kind of like you said, in a lot of ways, and I don't mean this badly, but the more family members that are involved, the more difficult it is. I think we all know that for anything in life.
Right.
We all come with our own ideas, and we all want what's best for mom. We all want what's best for dad, and I think that's the key, is that remembering that we all have the same goal in the end. And so usually, probably 90% of the time, if the client is happy, the children are in the end happy. They may have some things they want adjusted, or some, like you said, there might be, well, I walked in and she's on her phone or whatever, but they don't, but mom seems happy. They may not know the backstory of they were doing things for the last 3 hours and they just happened to have a phone call or whatnot.
Right.
A lot of times family members aren't there the whole time. And so, part of the process is always almost being kind of a counselor liaison between, that's the client care manager's job, to be that liaison between the client, the caregiver. But again, it comes down to that relationship. Like you said, you built a relationship with those caregivers, and that's almost always what happens, is that the caregivers end up building a relationship, not just with their clients, but with the extended family members. And then it ends up being a beautiful thing as much as it can be. I mean, it's not necessarily a fun part of life, but it can be. But I'd be lying if I said there weren't times when it's just
It's got to be very, very, very difficult at times, and I understand that. Um, so when you started out, you said even though you had experience as a nanny, okay, you didn't really have experience with a senior clientele. So you took jobs that were, I guess, less um, medically enriched, I guess is the way I would put it. Um, because you knew that you needed that experience before you could get there. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'll just point out, and I'm sure your listeners probably know this, but we're non-medical home care. So, none of what we're doing isn't anything that anybody can be trained to do. You don't have to have a medical background. You don't have to have that training. That being said, there's gray lines where there's definitely clients that need a whole lot more. They might have a catheter, they might have, colostomy bag, they might have a Hoyer lift, things like that. But clearly, you need training on, how to do transfers and whatnot. But for me, and I put this with anybody that's ever had children, that when you have those kids, you kind of learn and grow with them. Well, oftentimes that's what happens with caregivers, and that's what happened with me. I ended up being a caregiver for 5 years, and when I started with the client that I was with, her needs were such that I could handle it. I knew how to do it, and then as she declined, my skill level grew because I loved the client. I wanted to learn. I sought out training, and so I learned how to do a transfer correctly. I learned how to do, the bed baths and all that I needed to do, how to thicken food. And, suddenly I had an education on the job, usually the best way to learn. And
Right.
so it's the same for our caregivers. Some of our I hate to use word best, I love all our caregivers, but some of our caregivers who have become like the greatest at what they do are ones that started out, that came out of high school, or moms that just want to go back to work, and they're like, I've been a caregiver because I've been a mother my whole life, but I have no experience with this. And they come in, but because they have such a desire to do it, they want to learn. And I think that's the key, is that we can train just about any skill, but it's that desire to learn. And then that being said, we have caregivers, believe it or not, who are in their 80s themselves that are still doing this. And obviously there's some limitations that come with that, lifting and all that. So we, of course, match up our clients and our caregiver, or match up our caregivers with what they can handle. And that's the beauty. We can be so flexible because we have clients that need anything from 2 hours a week to 24 hours a day, every day. We have people that are companion care, where you just go over to their house, they give you a shopping list, you go grocery shopping, pick up their CVS, bring it back, drop it off, and that's, visit with them for a few minutes, to people who are bedbound and on hospice. And so we can fill any range depending on your skill level, depending on your background, depending on your availability, so that we can fit the needs of so many people. But the key is that we need people to fill those needs, because our neighbors and family members need it.
Absolutely. And it's some of the things that you've just mentioned are really important for us to just understand about caregiving. Um, many of us who are in our senior years and are getting very close, we stop and think, go, geez, I don't want anybody taking care of me. Okay. But care, it's a wide spectrum. And like you said, it might be somebody just going and doing your grocery shopping for you. Maybe you're not driving anymore. Um, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable driving anymore. And so, it's easier to give somebody that grocery list and let them go do the grocery shopping. And, you are free to take a walk down the street, go next door and visit a neighbor, whatever else it is that you want to do. That is caregiving. And some of us have looked at it. In fact, I remember when my mother um, moved to her independent living, she couldn't drive anymore. And they had a bus that would take them shopping. And she would say, I refuse to go on the bus. And we said, why? And she said, it makes me feel very old.
Yeah.
My mother was 91 at the time. And we said, okay, well, you still have a lot of spring in your step, but you can't drive. So how are you going to get to the grocery store? And she said, well, you could move back in town. And that was me. It's like, I'm working full time, mom. That's not going to happen. And so we did some research and we did find somebody who became her shopping companion. And sometimes mom went with her in the car and they went grocery shopping. There were other times that my mother would say, no, I have something else I want to do today. Here's my grocery list. And she would go. And my brothers and I were happy to pay for that because we knew that was something that my mother needed. And if going on the bus made her feel less of herself, we didn't want that to happen. Um, and so there are a variety of caregiving options that you offer. How is it? Um, and I'll just use this as an example. There are a lot of young girls now, and I probably young guys too, who are going to the vocational schools, who are getting their STNA right out of high school. Um, how is that generation gap? Have you seen how it works with your clients?
I mean, the younger caregivers and the older clients.
Right.
Yeah, there's it works either really well or really not well. So, and again,
Interesting.
it kind of depends on the client. And so, like you said, we'll get people to actually get their STNA while in high school. So we have caregivers as young as 18. I mean, you have to
Right.
be who come out of this. And a lot of the clients love it. They like, especially sometimes that companion, whatever, they like feeling like their grandchild's with them. And it's not, not a
Right.
caregiver. And some we'll have clients who will ask people to dress in street clothes, not in scrubs or whatever, because that's
Right.
what they want to feel like, kind of like probably like your mom's situation.
Right.
They don't want to feel like they have, a healthcare worker with them. They want to feel like they have their grandchild going grocery shopping with them. And we've found, like, for instance, my daughter is in nursing school. She works for us as one of our caregivers. And she's not had a client yet who didn't love her because she loves to listen to their stories. Her grandparents don't live close by. And so it's kind of her grandparent fix,
Sure.
and so she gets to have that. And so, we see that a lot. But then there are, I'll be truthful with you, there are the few clients that are like, they're young, they don't know anything, I don't want, and it's the same concept that we go into of, give them a chance. And then if it doesn't work out, we'll try to get you somebody else, but at least give somebody a chance before you decide. And some people will, and some people are just like, no, I want somebody at least 30, or I want, and it's hard because obviously we have to, we can't discriminate in any ways.
Right.
We won't, and we never would. We have other jobs for them. But when we know in our heart that this is a phenomenal caregiver, we hate to see somebody pass somebody up for what seems like an unnecessary reason.
Absolutely. And I almost did that with my mother. And I've shared that with quite a number of people that my mother had a stroke and was blind, but had no idea she was blind. So we we didn't even mention it because she was in the beginning stages of dementia, and we knew she would never truly understand it, and she'd keep asking over and over again. But she thought she could see. And we had a caregiver come in one evening who knew my mother's backstory, but did not know that she wasn't supposed to mention that my mother was blind. And I walked in and she's sitting there talking to her, I know you can't see, Dorothy, so I'm going to be your eyes. And I just wanted to start screaming. But my mother was calm. And so I figured I better stay calm. And I called the agency and I said, I want her out of here. She didn't follow the protocol. And they said, what protocol? And I told them, and they said, we didn't tell her. And I said, well, now I don't, I was mad at them, but I had a nice conversation with them. We understood it. I then pulled the care worker out of my mother's room when my mother was resting. And I explained it to her and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." She said, "Those words will not come out of my mouth again." And as it turns out, my mother never asked and never, but my initial reaction was, "You all did wrong by me."
Yeah.
But I want people to understand that we are all human, and as much work as you're going to put into matching people, occasionally mistakes can happen, but we need to talk them through. And I was so grateful I did because she turned out to be the best evening care worker my mother ever had.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to take that 6 to midnight shift. And
Mm.
she took it and, uh, you know, would always ask me if I wanted coffee or tea and, trying to take care of me as well. And, you know, there's some really good people in this world. So you're looking for people. How can they find you if they want to become a caregiver with Cherished Companions?
So like I said, the best way is our website, which is cherishedagency.com. And so they can go to that. They can call us directly. So I don't know if you give out our phone number or what,
You
but
can. Yep.
so the office number is 440-484-5390. So they can call us, they can ask for an application. We have paper applications we can send if there's anybody that, is just not internet savvy or just doesn't want to put their information out there. They can stop into the office, which is in Sugar Falls, and pick up an application. Our offices are open. We do things in person now that things are opening back up. And we try to get through the applications within 24 hours of receiving them to reach out, to anybody that applies. And then if anybody just has questions, they can feel free to call and talk, and we can delve deeper into, any questions they might have about working for us and, benefits and what all it entails and what sort of positions we have and where our clients are, because those are a lot of the typical questions
Right.
people.
And for those listening, you can still call that same number if you are looking for care for a family member. And if you aren't in the Cleveland area, um, and you have questions about home care, um, please go to Cherished Companions website, because if you read what they offer, that's what you want to look for. I wouldn't have been working with Doug all this time if I didn't believe in everything that you guys do. And I've talked to a number of other uh, care facilities around, and they all say the same thing. Cherished Companions does it right from the beginning to the end. And, it takes somebody like Doug to have that compassion in his heart, and he hires people that have that same love and compassion for humanity. And that's what we all need to do, is work together.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. But yeah, we work very hard to make sure that we are, hiring the right people, putting the right people out there, because it's not just a job to any of us. It really is a mission, a calling to help people to remain independent. And so, we look for people that share that vision or who we can, pass that vision on to. And we really do see ourselves as a family. I know a lot of companies say that, but we really do. As a family, all working towards the same thing.
We all have to remember, too, we never know when we're going to be in that position, when we need somebody to care for us. And so, if you're looking to be a caregiver, think about what may come in the future for you so that you can do all the right things today. Again, Lisa, thank you for joining us. Um, Tell Doug we missed him, but you know what? You're excellent. So come on back and talk to us again in the future, okay?
All right, I'll let them know, and thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye now.